Okay. Oh. Wendy? I don't know if you know. Okay, she's snuck off. I know. All right. You're welcome. Sure. Yeah. 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 Or maybe we'll start with her instead. Okay.
Hey, Michael.
Hey.
You're not muted. We can hear everything you're saying.
I know, but I'm talking to Linda in the office, so.
Oh, never mind. I was having so much fun.
I'm gonna go because I'm not muted and everything's just come online. Bye-bye. Okay. I know, I was just looking to go, okay, I don't think I'm muted yet because that's not automatic. All right, muting now.
Hey everybody, how we doing?
Great.
Good. Michael, good
Sir.
to see you. I think
You
you're
too.
our only out-of-state guest. How are things? Are you still in Aiken?
Yes, I am. Relaxing here in the breezeway.
Oh, nice. That's a cool thing to have.
It is. It's a lovely enclosed space between the, what was the outside of the house and the outside of the garage.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to just wait a couple minutes because this is a little bit harder to get into this class than normally, just so I want to give space for people who are struggling to get on, and then we'll start in just a moment, okay? Maybe like a minute or two.
All right, well, I will mute myself and also run and grab a piece of paper.
And then if we wear glasses, we can put them on. So
Okay. So this is Gates of Light. And let me just talk for a moment about the class itself. I want to say that this class, several of you here have already been part of this class. It used to meet monthly at the JCC, and now it doesn't. And now it's meeting every other Monday starting today. And the class is sort of emerging, and it'll, in the sense that like it's going to change a little bit, because initially the idea was the idea of this class, and the reason that it's named Gates of Light is because we are studying this book, Sha'arei Orah, Gates of Light by Yosef Gikatilla. And Gikatilla was an Italian Kabbalist, and very, very important and influential book. And in fact, it may have influenced the Zohar itself. He certainly was, he may have even been part of the circle of the Zohar. So I guess what I want to say is, so what we were doing with that book is we were going from chapter to chapter each month. We would read a different chapter, and the way that he has his book organized is he starts at the lowest sphera, and I'll explain in a moment what a sphera is, and then he works his way up through the chapter so that by the end of the book you're at Keter, which is the highest of the sphirot. And so in any event, we are on the sphera of Bina, and so, you know, really, after today and 2 more meetings, we would have completed the book. But I think what we'll probably do is, I think I'll probably just leave this, let this class go, keep going, and it'll become a place to explore Kabbalah and maybe different aspects of Chassidut. Yeah, and so it'll kind of, we'll see what happens with it. I'm not exactly sure, but that's the deal. So what I wanted to actually start with was the following. Hold on. Okay, so now here's the deal. How many people, raise your hand if you were part of this class before? Cheryl, Robert, Bob, Robert, and Abby. Abby, you were a couple times, right? Yeah, a little bit. And Liz, were you?
A couple of times. A couple of
times you came to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I guess then with apologies to Robert and Cheryl, I'm gonna sort of a little bit. I think it makes sense just to kind of reintroduce people to some of the basic concepts, but I'm going to try to do it in a quick way. So for sure, when I finish this, you are going to have questions, because I'm covering a lot of material that's very deep in just a few minutes, and this is not an introductory class. And so I'm sort of trying to walk a fine line here. So so this is the spherotic tree. This is the what's called the tree of life, and it is simply a diagram for us to be able to understand the ways in which the Kabbalists talked about different aspects of the divine. And to be clear, this does not exist anywhere in reality. This structure as a physical structure, this does not exist anywhere. This is simply a diagram for teaching, essentially, and for talking about these concepts that are very difficult to talk about. So Gikatilla did not invent this diagram. But you can actually see, so on the copy of this paperback version of the English translation of his book, you can actually see a form of the tree there. And this is, you know, obviously this is like a 20th century, 21st century printing, but this diagram actually appeared on the first edition, I believe, of his book. So his book starts here on the lowest sphera, and works its way up. So what is a sphera? A sphera, hold on a second. I want to make sure there's somebody else tending to the various people trying to get into the class. Okay, Jemmy is letting people into the class. Good. So what is a sphera? Essentially, the sphirot are a tool for talking about the unity of God in a world in which we don't experience unity. And so it's an attempt to demonstrate the ways in which all of these different dimensions of God interact together. So sometimes, so the Kabbalah starts with the assumption that God is everywhere and God is everything. There's nothing in the world besides God. Anything you can see, that from the darkest dark to the brightest bright and everything in between, everything is some aspect, some dimension of God in a greater or lesser state of concealment or fulfillment. There is nothing else. And so the Kabbalists are looking around at their world and they're seeing different experiences. You know, sometimes there's unbelievable joy and a sense of connectedness to God, and you're just sure the world is right and everybody's taken care of and good things are happening all around you. And then that happens in the same world that, you know, there's terrible injustice and horrible things and terrible accidents in which the innocent are taken along with not such righteous people. And so the Kabbalists are trying to understand how all of those things can happen, and how do they, in spite of the fact that it feels like sometimes God is in the world and sometimes God is not, how is it that God's unity is complete and unbroken? Okay, and so one way of looking at the tree of life is an attempt to kind of diagram the inner workings of the divine behind the scenes of the appearance of the physical world, so to speak. What makes Sha'arei Orah unique is that the author, Yosef Chikatilia, connects each of these sphirot to a name for God, to a name of God. So his book, I'll show you my Hebrew copy. So his gargantuan book, this is Sha'arei Orah. It is this thick, and I'm showing you its thickness because this entire thing is just filled with names of God and how they relate to the Sefirot. And so he's not the only person to do this, but he's the first to kind of do it in a systematic, very, very complete way. So he wants you to know that when you read, when we say the word Adonai, for example, that's different from when we use the word Elohim. Like, you know, we may think as in prayer, we recognize those two different names, but we don't think, you know, the average person doesn't think much of it. It's like, it's one name, it's another name, whatever, that doesn't mean anything. And he says, no, those are talking about completely different aspects or experiences or energies of the divine, and they're critical to understanding the operation of the universe. You know, there's Shekhinah, there's El, there's El Chai, there's Adonai Tzavaot. I mean, there's hundreds of names. And his goal, essentially, what he wants to do is, Jikatilia, his goal is that you should be able to read this book, and then after reading this book, this book should enable you then to read the Torah with a true understanding. Okay, because when you read the Torah informed by the Kabbalistic meaning of each name, you will then read the Torah properly, because you'll know what each name means precisely. Or to put it differently, to put it in a maybe not such a lovely way, if you read the Torah without understanding the Kabbalistic valence of the names that are used for God, you don't stand a chance of understanding what the Torah means. You'll walk away from it thinking that it's a book of fables and moral lessons, and it's a book about a bunch of old guys who lived a long time ago, and it's a book about wars and people and diseases, and you'll be hopelessly lost and confused, and that's what you'll think the Torah is. And from his perspective as a good Kabbalist, that's not at all what the Torah is. What the Torah is a detailed explanation of the kind of inner workings of reality and the nature of the world. And there's simply no way to understand it without understanding the names of God. That's what he would have thought. And, I also think that like any good Kabbalist, he was a extreme elitist, not in a snobby way, but just, there were not that many people that either by inclination or by chance or dedication or fortune were able to study Torah all day. And that's what you would have to do to understand this book properly, and to then apply it to your reading of the Torah would require a lifetime of learning. And so Chikatilo, like all of the classic Kabbalists, until the time of the Hasidic revolution in the 18th century, there was sort of assumed that the vast majority of Jews had no idea what they were doing when they were reading the Torah. And excuse me, I should rephrase that. They had no idea of what the Torah really meant, and they would understand it as a series of fables and moral lessons and stories. And the Kabbalists, I think, we're a little off track here, but I don't think the Kabbalists were overly worried about that, because they felt like that's just how God made the world. And our task is to make sure that we can guide our communities, the people who are not educated, into at least doing the right thing. Because the people Israel, even if the vast majority are not enlightened in terms of Kabbalah, they can at least still contribute towards the redemption by doing the mitzvot properly and by being good people and doing the best they can. Okay, but my major point is simply that in his mind, this book is not sort of like a lovely little icing that you put on top of your Jewish life. It's like essential to understanding what it means to be a Jew and what it means to try to cleave to God. Okay, so in our class, when did I start teaching this? In October, I think, or November, which seems like a different world ago. We started down here with his first chapter. When I'm saying here, you don't know what I'm pointing to because I'm not sharing my screen. We started with this sphera, which is he calls it Malchut. In this diagram, it's called Shekhinah. He also calls it Shekhinah, but the names here don't necessarily correspond to the names that he uses primarily. And by the way, in Malchut has like 15, 20 other names, but he titles each chapter based on a particular name, and then he shares all the other names for it. And then we went through Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, Din, Chesed, and now we are at Binah. So to be honest, I'm not 100% sure of how to proceed because, but I think I'm just going to dive headlong into where the class would be going, into some kind of continuation of it. But and we're gonna spend most of the time today talking about Bina because that's where the class would have been headed today. In this session, had the class continued. But I will say this, that for a quick overview of what we're talking about here, these 10 sphirot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These 10 sphirot are all ways of talking about the different ways that God manifests in and creates and lends God's self to the world and operates within the world. Keter is the highest of the sphirot, and it's unknowable. We can't understand it. It's too far beyond human comprehension, And not only that, it is so suffused with divine perfection that were we theoretically to be able to kind of, meld our brains with it, we would just sort of evaporate. We would die because it's so sort of like purely spiritual. So it can't, in the world of creation, it can't really be articulated. What's worth saying here is that even Keter does not actually encapsulate all of God's reality. And that's important to say. The spherotic tree that you're looking at here is a diagram of God's relationship to the world as we, to the world of creation. But actually the truest form of God is something that the Kabbalists call Ein Sof. And the Ein Sof literally means without end, but the English word infinite is the same thing. Ein Sof is truly beyond comprehension, and there's just absolutely nothing to say about it except that it's infinite. And to the extent that God has a true essence, it would be Ein Sof. But beyond that, we can't say anything. Keter is almost like a spark of the Ein Sof that decided to create the world. And so maybe with Keter, by the way, whose literal meaning is crown, maybe with Keter we can say that Keter somehow reflects the divine will to create a world. But there's nothing we can really know about that as to why God created the world. Different Kabbalists have theories, but we're really in the realm of speculation because it's beyond our knowing. Okay, we can't unify with Keter. Now, the way that the Sefirot become from 1 to 10 is they go through a process of what's usually translated as emanation. They emanate from one to the other, and so it's almost like Keter gives birth to Chokhmah, and Chokhmah you can think of as like a potential energy in the universe. It's the potential unarticulated energy. This is not a great, it's not a perfect analogy, but there are no perfect analogies. If you think of Chokhmah as being like an infinite, infinitely powerful, like a electricity station, right, with never-ending electricity. You can't really make any use of it. It's really more than anything, it's just potential. And until that electricity gets channeled into different ways, lighting a city or creating, lighting a house or doing any of the other things that one might do with electricity, creating heat, whatever it might be, it doesn't have any shape or form. It's just potential. So Chokhmah is sort of like, it's the spiritual energy that is in potency at all moments, from which the created universe will eventually take its shape and form, but in and of itself, it's unarticulated. So how does that relate to Chokhmah? In what way is that? Because Chokhmah means wisdom. Well, I could venture an answer, but what I really want to say is you do not want to make and here I'll stop screen sharing just to mix it up for a minute. You don't want to make the mistake of thinking that the names of the Sefirot are really their true meaning. Okay, so Chokhmah again means wisdom, but if you think of that Sefirah as wisdom in the sense that we use the word, it's just going to confuse you. So you just got to understand that it's Chokhmah, and sometimes it'll resonate with the meaning of the word wisdom, and other times it won't at all. Okay, so you just got to have some flexibility in terms with you can think of the names as being placeholders, and that you got to just open yourself to what a placeholder what a placeholder could be. One way to think of a sphera in this, just only in this sense, is, think of a sphera as a person, right? Or excuse me, as a person's name. Like, I'm Josh, but that doesn't mean that I'm, exactly what I'm about, or it doesn't, there's like one, you may know me as one aspect of Josh. Actually, you guys mostly don't know me as Josh, you know me as Rabbi. So I have the name Josh. To some of you, that means Rabbi. To some of you, it means good teacher. To others of you, it means boring, droning teacher. To some of you, it means guy who rides a motorcycle, guy who likes music, whatever it is. But if you try to lock me down to any one of those, it's kind of pointless. And the same is true with each of you, right? We all have infinite meanings. Well, maybe not infinite. We have a huge array of meanings. So just think of the Sphirot in that way, okay? And the names that they're assigned by tradition sometimes resonate with what's trying to be conveyed, and other times it does not. Okay, so Chokhmah is the potential energy of the universe. Bina is what we're going to talk about today, and Bina begins to be the articulation of that potentiality in terms of creation. Bina becomes a sort of turning point where the physical world begins to come into being. I'm not going to go through each of the Sphirot, because what I want to say here is that for right now, I want to say that these upper three are considered to sort of be heavenly and really beyond our grasp in some sense. Bina plays a kind of interesting role as being partly within our grasp and partly beyond our grasp. But these are really called the upper Sphirot. These are the upper Sphirot. The lower ones, from Chesed down, are ones where the Kabbalists really begin to connect these to aspects of the created world and the human personality. So Chesed is the quality in the world. It means loving kindness, and it is this force that unites all things. Din is the attribute of sternness or judgment or following rules or being guided by justice. And all of these ones that I'm circling around right here, Chesed, Din, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, these all circle Tiferet. Tiferet is really at the heart of the created world. And Tiferet is the sphera that kind of balances all of the different cosmic energies into a perfect harmony, allowing the world to obtain, allowing the world to hold together. And all God's divine energy is kind of poured into all of these Sphirot, so to speak, and it's obscured or revealed to various degrees in various ways that we see all around us in the world of creation. And finally, in the world of Shekhinah or Malchut, and that's the world that's the kind of the upper dimensions of the world that we live in, is where it all actually becomes manifest. Our consciousness, our ordinary consciousness, when we're like really tuned in, is in the consciousness of Malchut. Okay, so when we begin to turn our thoughts to the existence of God, or even if we begin to turn our thoughts into, I want to know what is the right way to live, or I'm going to begin to make efforts to see how, to understand God's unity. Your mind is already in the realm of Malchut or Shekhinah, because you're tapping into kind of the lowest level of divine potentiality. And then through our actions and our meditation and our understanding and our prayer, our consciousness can kind of ascend the ladder, so to speak, and come closer and closer to unity with God. We'll never have perfect unity with God as an individual, because if we did, we wouldn't be able to be alive. But the people Israel, and I'll close this part of our discussion with this idea, and then I'll pause for questions. The people Israel is actually one of Am Yisrael, or Yisrael is one of the names for Shekhinah, for Malchut. So when the people Israel are righteous in their actions, they're filled with all the right attributes of kindness and decency, but also of justice and compassion, and they are seeking to cleave to God with their elevated consciousness through prayers. If the people Israel were to do that, according to the Kabbalists, what you would have is you would then have like a reflection back of from the realm of the earthly, of Shekhinah. The people Israel would be reflecting back perfect divine light, and you would have unity. You would have the Messianic era, because all of these upper outflowings of God would then be matched by our sort of reflecting back to God, our perfect unity with God. Okay, so I know I'm sort of parenthetically mentioning these concepts that in and of themselves could be like 40-hour lectures about each topic, but I'm trying to do justice to the fact that this is not really an intro class, but we have a bunch of new folks. So let me pause there, and I will take some questions and probably not answer all of them, and probably not answer many of them satisfactorily, but and then I want to dive into Bina. So let me pause for clarifying questions. That's a really bad sign, because there's no way that I was clear about everything, and there's no way you understood everything. Okay, but I will give you another 15 seconds, and then if not, we'll move on. Marcia Spellman, why should we care about these layers of knowing? Great question. Why should we care? Well, I guess, well, let me give a non-satisfactory answer, and then I'll try to give a satisfactory answer. Let me say a non-ultimate answer. The non-ultimate answer, Marcia, is that, that first of all, Kabbalah has over the last, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years in American Jewish, in global Jewish life has really just caught fire. And it's now just part of the essential language that our people speaks. And there's a huge amount of misinformation and misunderstanding about Kabbalah and what it is. And so one answer could just be, well, I myself am not a Kabbalist, but I want to know what is this important language that our people speak. And I don't want to have Madonna explain it to me, but I want to really understand what this thing is about. So that's kind of one answer. Another answer, though, is that in an era in which some of the kind of core historical narratives of the Jewish people and of all religions have kind of broken down, the Kabbalah gives us a way to talk about God's oneness in a way that can be meaningful in our lives. So, for example, 300 or 400 years ago, nobody doubted the original story of the Torah, which is that God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. Now, Jews, being Jews, could not ever agree exactly on what that meant, but at least everybody agreed that at some point God in some way revealed something to a human being, and then that human being then taught it to the community of Israel, and that gave meaning and force, as well as a great deal of kind of compliance, with the Torah, for a number of reasons: philosophically, culturally, historically, in the study of history, and all kinds of things. That myth and many other myths have broken down, and so many Jews have turned to the Kabbalah because it gives a way of relating to the tradition that doesn't have to be dependent on the veracity of any particular myth, but it gives you a way of bringing yourself into connection with the Torah and its teachings in a deep and meaningful way. My final answer, well, I guess two final answers, is that the Kabbalah seeks to, in the world of diversity and multiplicity and division, it gives us a way to talk about how God's unity, how God's oneness makes sense, or we can try to make sense of God's unity, But in addition, it also, and for this we really have Hasidism to thank, the revolution of the Hasidic masters in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. It also gives us a map to the human soul, because whatever took place above, whatever forces God used to create the world, is also mapped upon our own souls. And so what we can do, and we're not doing it that much in this class, is to talk about the forces of Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferet, Chesed, and Din within ourselves, which then becomes a language for our own kind of, I don't know, for want of a better term, a kind of spiritual therapeutic approach to understanding and creating harmony within ourselves. And then the last answer I'll give is because a Kabbalah can really enrich our understanding and deepen our connection to our traditional texts. Now he's making, Gikatili is making the argument that this is the way to read the Torah. But in addition to that, in terms of the world of prayer, an understanding of Kabbalah can really, really deepen our appreciation of prayer and open a bunch of new pathways for understanding Jewish prayer. So that's why I think you should care, or one might care, I should say. Okay. Yes, and Mariah said it seems to be a way for humans to understand the complexity of God. I think that's a good way to view it. Okay, so we are going to go onward and upward. I have to get my, whoops, I want to get my texts here. Okay, so, all right, so you are looking at obviously English, this is an English translation, some of it mine, some of it directly out of this book, of the 8th gate, that is the world of Binah. So we're going to go here and, you know, I'm not going to be checking the chat box, so I'm going to pause periodically, and at that point you should ask questions by unmuting your microphone. Maybe what we'll do is at those moments I'll ask you to raise your hand, and we'll dive in. So, says the author, and that he wrote that. Says the author, we will, and which is, I just think, like a formal way in a lot of medieval writing, a kind of odd, what seems to us as awkward, but in that period would have been just kind of formal. We will explain in this gate the secret of the 8th name, written one way and pronounced another. So let me just show one thing. So it is the 8th name because he started at Malchut. It's the 8th name of God because he started here, which again on this diagram is Shekhinah, but he calls it Malchut. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is the 8th name. That's all he means by that. It is written one way and pronounced another. Okay, that sounds very, very mysterious, but it's not that mysterious because it is written Yud He Vav He and it is pronounced Elohim. Now you may be saying, what the heck is he talking about? Well, you already know that we don't pronounce, well, you may have forgotten, but we do not pronounce that name, right? When we see this name, Yud He Vav He, whether it's in the Torah or whether it is in the prayer book, we don't pronounce it. You know, some branches of Christianity try to pronounce it, but we don't. We usually call it Adonai, right? And it's usually pronounced Adonai, but there are some parts, in particular in the prophets, where it is actually, when we see that, it is pronounced Elohim. And it does happen not infrequently in the reading of the prophets. So sometime when I am chanting Haftarah, or the cantor is chanting Haftarah, if you read along, you will very, very carefully, you will hear once in a while, you'll hear that word pronounced as Elohim. Okay, so he's not he's going to get very far out and abstract here, but at this point, he's just talking about a real thing. But he's going to try to invest meaning with to the fact, he's going to try to attach meaning to the fact that it is written as Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, and sometimes it is pronounced as Elohim. You must know that this name binds all the Sfirot into a bind connecting the emanation, and it's drawing out. So take a breath, because some of you are like probably panicking because you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what's going on. And that's not just the people who are new to the class, because this is very hard stuff. So it's okay, we'll get there. It's drawing out because it is the third name from the three supernal names. So let's just take that sentence apart. You must know that this name binds all of the Sfirot. So we don't yet know exactly what he means by this, but in some way, Bina is binding, it's going to connect all of these different divine names. And again, these divine names are properties of the divine. They're like, you know, you can think of them as one analogy for thinking, and it's imperfect analogy of thinking about a sphera is think of the way that a prism takes you shine a white light into a prism and it comes out as a rainbow, or it comes out as a spectrum. So underneath all of it, there's just God's divine light, but each sphera reveals different dimensions of that light, different ways that God operates in the universe. And there's something about Bina that he's not yet explained that links all of the different bands of light together and collects them together, okay? That's an analogy. Okay. Connecting the emanation, okay? The emanation is simply nothing simple. The emanation is the emergence of God's pure divine light. And again, even when we say light, I know you know this intellectually, but we have to remember that it's not light. Light is, again, just an analogy, right? That's all we have. So you can call it energy. That's also an analogy, but some divine force that is giving shape and quality to the universe, it emanates from one form to another. It takes different shape as it unfolds into the realm where we can begin to connect to the divine, right? So think about, you look at a tree and it's so beautiful, and you're looking at the little insect that's crawling on the leaf, and then you look at the leaf, and then you look at the branch, and then you look at the leaves. And if you trace everything back to its original root, if you can imagine the root, not just of the tree, but the root of God's energy that eventually gave birth to the tree, that's what we're trying to trace. At some point in the world of creation, things become manifest to us, and he's interested in tracing it back to the original divine birth of the world and of the world that we see. So the Kabbalists talk about that as that unfolding from God's will to give birth to a tree, to the growth of the tree and its blossoming as a process of emanation, okay? And it's drawing out like from one phase to another of creation, because it is the third name from the three supernal names. It is the third name from the three supernal names, which simply means Keter, Chochmah, and Bina. Now, the fact that he uses the word supernal, and I'm trying to remember, I don't remember what word I was translating as supernal, but it's okay. It's not just the word supernal, which means like heavenly or upper, is not just a general adjective that he's using to say like they're really lovely. These three have a status that is separate from the seven below, right? Keter, Chochmah, and Bina are realms of the heavenly that are very obscure to us. As I said, Chochmah, we can really only talk about it as a potential energy. Keter, we can say almost nothing about. Bina, he will say quite a bit about, but these are really things that go beyond the realm of the human. They flow into us, but in a way they're separate also from the created world, okay? Chesed is firmly implanted within the created world, but Bina and Chokhmah and Keter are talked about as being like supernal or heavenly, okay? These 7 are talked about as being the lower Sfirot, okay? So that's what he means by supernal. It is the 3rd of the 3 supernal names. From this name goes out the outflow of light and emanation, okay, we've talked about that, and the blessing through all the channels until the 7 Sfirot below are blessed from the 3 Sfirot above. Okay, now here I want to return to our diagram. So what's important to know is that, do you see these lines connecting these? These are called sinorot, or channels. And they're there for a reason, because Keter, these are all connected. And that's why we talk about emanation. Keter becomes Chokhmah. Chokhmah becomes Bina. And they're constantly almost like in a dialogue. They're like communicating with one another. So if you think of, sorry, I was going to say, give it another analogy, but I'm going to wait a little bit more. The Bina takes the energy of Keter and Chokhmah, and somehow it is responsible for radiating it into the 7 Sfirot below. So let's read that sentence again. From this name goes out the outflow of light and emanation, and the blessing through all the channels until the 7 Sfirot below are blessed from the 3 Sfirot above. So just meditate on how beautiful that idea is, because what it's saying is that God is trying to shower the world with blessing at all times, and Bina is the channel. It's the vessel through which God's supernal desire to bless the world, which is really beyond our comprehension, it begins to come into the world through Bina. It's almost like God, this is really an imperfect analogy, but imagine a water pitcher that a gardener is using. The plants can't know anything about what led the water to be in the water pitcher, but when it pours out of that spout, that's almost like Bina, right? It connects that upper desire to bestow blessing to the capacity of the garden to receive the water into the ground, okay? So it's the Bina is this incredible channel of connecting God's upper light, God's upper desire to bless the world with the universe's desire to receive that blessing. Okay, and then what you might be thinking is, okay, Bina is that, but what is Bina? Is Bina a pitcher of water? What is it? Is it a planet? Is it a thing? Does it exist? And its definition is, my only answer to that is listen to what it is. Bina is that which takes all of the blessing above and pours it into the world below. That's what Bina is. Bina is a way of talking about that something that connects this divine will. We cannot see the divine will, but there is, according to the Kabbalists, a divine will to bless the world. What allows that will to come into the world to bless it? That's what we call Bina. Okay? Let me pause.
Can I make a comment? Are you taking questions?
Yeah, I was just going to pause right at that moment. So Lenny, go ahead.
I have two. One is really a basic question about the difference in colors, where some have yellow and some have clear links. But my bigger question is, often we hear about Bina being kind of like a divine intelligence or like a unmanifested, like a wisdom, but not like a human wisdom.
Right.
How does that play, or how does that relate to how you just described Bina?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, with regard to the colors, there is a whole doctrine of the colors that I'm not going to get into. I love saying that because it makes it sound like this isn't the right time, but really the reason is because I literally don't understand the colors.
Right.
It's just not something I've studied, but there is an answer to your question. I don't know the answer.
Right.
Now, with regard to the second question, this is actually a case where we can play with the literal meaning of the word bina in a way that has a connection to our ordinary understanding. So if you think of, if we look at, so chokhmah and bina are in this dyad, right? And if you can remember here, I'll bring us back to the, so chokhmah and bina, I described chokhmah as this potential energy. Remember that, like the analogy of like this, like infinite electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of thinking about chokhmah, a better analogy that will be a way of addressing your question. If you think of chokhmah, let's think of it this way. Let's think of it this way. Let's think of of an architect, and the architect has a crazy idea for a building. Just this incredible vision of what this particular gorgeous you want the architect, she wants to do something just radically different, and has this instinct, this idea of something that's very, very beautiful. So for example, let's take this. Okay, so can you all see that? Okay, so this is the Guggenheim in Bilbao, and what you're seeing is the product of all of if we want to liken the universe to the Bilbao Museum, what you're seeing is the building in the realm of Malchut. Okay, like this is the actual physical final product of the world. But initially what this building was, you can imagine the architect wakes up in the middle of the night and has this sense of like, oh my God, I have this sense of like, there's going to be a new kind of building. It's not going to be square. It's not going to be like a tower, that boring old square standard Western shape. It's going to be organic. I have no idea how I'm going to accomplish this, but it's going to just be this bursting organic thing. And then he goes back to sleep. Okay, right now that's the realm of chokhmah. Binah comes into being where the next morning he wakes up and he sits down at the drafting table and begins to draw out different organic shapes. And that process of the articulation from that instinct of building something very new and organic feeling to the beginning, just the beginning of the taking of the shapes, we might view that as Binah, right? The articulation of the idea, giving this instinct a sense of understanding and comprehensibility. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, but that would be saying that the Chokhmah is prior to the Bina.
Right.
Is that correct? Can you show the picture of the spherode again real quickly?
Yeah, one sec. Yeah.
So maybe that's what the color that links it is. Well, I don't know. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense,
But
really.
you just have to really, you said a very, very difficult and important principle, which is that Chokhmah precedes Bina.
Right.
And as the Kabbalists talk about it, yes, it does. So again, in our book, it's confusing because he goes from the lower to the higher. But in terms of like the unfolding of God's emanation, Chokhmah is prior. And yet there's a constant, like eternal back and forth between all of these things. But yes, simply put, Chokhmah precedes Bina.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Patty's raising an elbow. Anne, unmute yourself, yeah.
Just trying to visualize this idea that it's Binah that binds the lower sphirot to the upper, but in the schematic, Binah is not directly connected to all of them.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, so that's a really good question. Like you might say, well, Tiferet is the one that binds them all, right? That's because
That looks like what's happening.
right, it does. And so I think a way to understand that though is to look at this connecting line between Bina and Tiferet.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry. I thought you could see in my brain. Okay, look at this connecting line between Bina and Tiferet, right? So Tiferet is actually the beginning of Tiferet is like the harmonization of all of the forces of creation. And so that's one sense in which Bina is binding everything. But really what it means, I think the way to understand the binding force of Bina is that it is the link between the upper and the lower, right? So if you understand that these three are what we call the upper sphirot, right? The kind of realm of the purely divine. And then you take these lower ones as being kind of the way that the divine energy begins to manifest in physical creation. Okay, you take those two ideas, and then you take the final idea that it moves in this direction, Keter, Chochma, Bina, and then on down. In that sense, Bina links them all because it's linking the upper and the lower.
Then why is Chochma drawn so that it is linked exactly the same way? Chochma has the same connections that Bina does.
Right. I think here you have to just understand that maybe there are limits to understanding the diagram, because that's one answer. And then, limits in the utility of the diagram. But another answer, Anne, is that it goes a little bit to the last point that I just made to Lenny, which is that one of the complex aspects of the Kabbalah that we're not talking about, that I'm not talking about in part because I'm not knowledgeable enough about it, is the ways in which on the one hand, these things are moving in a downward direction, but they're also moving in an upward direction simultaneously. Because human consciousness, the consciousness of the human realm, which is also invested with divine energy, is seeking to move up in this direction, and it's grasping for Bina and Chochma. But none of those are fully satisfying or perfect answers. But I think you just got to trust that the energy is going from Keter Chochma to Bina, and the diagram does not capture perfectly that dimensionality. Okay, Cheryl.
Going back to the idea that none of this is concrete, is something we can reify. There is no right or wrong about what that tree is, but sort of the way I've learned that the flow or the order of precedence is once you go to Bina, from Chochma to Bina, then there's a line from Bina to Chesed, which is not in that particular diagram.
Right.
But I think if you saw other diagrams, there might be a line there.
Yeah.
And,
right. And, yeah. So sometimes there is the line between Bina and Chesed, but one of the things that we talked about a little bit when we talked about Tiferet is the relationship of the Sphirot around Tiferet to Tiferet. So one sec. So sometimes actually the way that there are some diagrams, or sometimes the Kabbalists talk about this in a way that doesn't even include the ones around Tiferet, because Tiferet, sometimes you see Keter Chochma, Bina, Tiferet, and Shechina, because there are ways, and this is, I think, part of the answer to your question. There are ways in which Tiferet comes first, and then all of these other ones that encircle it sort of then emerge from Tiferet and help contribute a balance to it, because Tiferet contains all of them. But other times, indeed, the Kabbalists actually talk about it differently. They talk about Bina giving birth to Chesed in the way that Cheryl's saying. Okay, so it's just very confusing. And there are multiple Kabbalists, and sometimes their pictures don't merge with each other. Okay, I'm going to keep going back to the text, if that's okay. Ugh, where'd I go? Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Bilbao. We don't need you anymore. Okay. Okay. Oops, that's not it. Oh, yeah. What did I do? I want this one. Okay. What you must know is that which is written with the letters Havaya, and by Havaya it just means Yud He Vav He, and read with the name Elohim. Sorry, here I put Elohim, but Elohim. It is the secret of being grasped here and here, because it is grasped by the world of complete mercy, which is the secret of Keter. And in Keter are held two names. Don't worry, we're going to go back over this. One on the right and one on the left. On the right, the name Yah, and on the left, the name written Yud He Vav He and pronounced Elohim. And this is the secret of Bina. Okay, so what he's saying is this, that, if you look at this tree again, okay, Keter, which is the beginning spark of God's desire to create the universe, it is, and has to be really a matter of faith for Kabbalists, it is understood as being connected to compassion and mercy, okay, as opposed to being judgment. God created the world, and its foundation is compassion and mercy. Now, that does not square with our experience, but that's a separate issue, right? We often perceive the world as being filled with harshness and cruelty, but the foundation of God's desire to create, according to the Kabbalists, is founded in mercy and compassion, okay? Binah grasps both Keter, that aspect of mercy, right? So everything Binah brings into the world is filled with God's compassion, God's desire to help and to heal and to do good and to love. It has that within it, but, and this is where, again, Bina becomes the linking of the upper and the lower world cannot be separated from the idea of deen, of judgment. So now we have to circle back to this and explain why that is, and then I'll go back to the Kabbalistic diagram. The word, for a minute, I'm going to use, instead of the word judgment, I'm going to use the word delineation, okay? You cannot have a world without delineation, right? Otherwise, it's just a big mass of potential, right? So imagine a big ball of clay before it's shaped, or, before it's delineated into different parts, it's not a work of art, it's just a blob. You begin to shape it and put like that branch over there and this branch over here. You begin to shape it into a tree, right? But now, no longer is it a perfectly unified, symmetrical, round thing. Now it has delineation as different parts. So too with the world. If we're going to have a world where there's a you and there's a me, and there's a time and there's a space, and there's animals and trees and vegetation and oxygen. So now that of course that's part and parcel. When we talk about a created world, we're talking about a world in which things, plural, exist. That world of delineation, the Kabbalists also associate with the world of judgment, and the world of severity, and the world of boundaries, simply because there's a you and there's a me. Well, as soon as there's a multiplicity, you have the possibility of judgment and of right and wrong, right? And we talked about this a lot in this class when we talked about the sphere of deen, because this is the essential nature of deen. Because if there's a you and there's a me, So now you have your own desires and I have my own desires. So even if we get along famously, even if we have like beautiful harmony between us, we're still going to have to talk about what is your space and what's my space. How much food are you going to, if we're living together, how much food are you going to save for me? I don't need very much, but I don't want to die. So please give me some. And then if you take a little bit more than your share, or even if you don't, we're now thinking in terms of division and judgment and right and wrong, okay? So for the world to exist, you have to have delineation and judgment. That is, in a sense, in tension with God's primal unity that's just perfect oneness without any delineation. Does that make some sense? Okay, so Bina, standing as it does at the whoops, what am I trying to do? Bina, standing as it does, whoops, between the upper and the lower, also stands linking the world of connection, of oneness, of unity, to the world of multiplicity. It receives, so to speak, it's informed by the energy of Keter and Chokhmah, which are undivided, undifferentiated energies, right? That you could think of like, if Keter is the divine will to bestow good on the world, Chokhmah is the potential idea for how it's going to unfold in the world. Binah, it begins to form into concepts about how the world is going to be differentiated. So it takes that supernal unity and it begins to divide it. So on the one hand, it has God's mercy. And if you think about mercy, the word they use for is mercy or compassion or rachamim. If you think about rachamim, rachamim has unity within it, right? If I have compassion on you, my heart is connecting to you. And remember that the word rachamim or mercy comes from the word rechem, which means womb, right? So womb is two things that are separated, but they're also totally unified, right? A womb has the potential to carry life within it, a separate life, but a life that's not really separate. It's a totally comforting, compassionate, loving environment of what's the word, of giving and taking, right? And that impulse for divine compassion, holding the world in the divine womb, so to speak, is the core instinct that God has. But at some point, Binah now brings that energy into the world, and you get a world of delineation. You get a world where there's you and there's me, and there's plants and there's life and there's death and there's animals. And in that sense, Binah is also the world of separation. So Binah plays a role that no other sphera plays, which is that it has both of these energies within it. So let me pause there because that's enough to blow anyone's mind, including my own. Clarifying questions, comments? Man, you guys are all master Kabbalists. Either that or I'm doing something terribly wrong. Michael.
I'm not sure where to start. I've been thinking earlier just about counting the Omer and
Right.
how we start with Chesed. It's, it's like we can't even start on those upper three because they're beyond our mind's grasp to be able to even work with it. But then when we go through those lower seven, we go day by day and week by week, showing how each one of them has each of the others flowing through it.
Right.
I mean, just as, looking at that diagram.
Right. That's actually, that's a nice way to demonstrate maybe practically some of the ways that these different sphera work together is through an Omer counting calendar. But yeah, go ahead.
But I'm looking at the Keter, Chokhmah, Binah, and that being symbolized or being the reason for Adam and Chava eating from the tree. They started out kind of being in that pure place of eminence, and eating from that tree was opening up that whole thing of delineation.
Right. That's
That
right.
there is good and evil, there's right and wrong.
Right.
And it just opened it up into everything coming into this world that seems totally dualistic,
Right.
and where we have to struggle to find echad, to find
Beautiful.
that
Beautiful.
unity that was just what it was up before.
Yeah, beautiful. No, that's exactly right. So Adam and Eve are in that sense, yeah, it's a beautiful illustration, I think, of that. And so what you just, so I think one of the, I guess I'll have to close on this idea, even though we've only scratched the surface of Bina. Maybe what we could do is next time spend more time articulating Bina. Maybe that's one way to make use of our more frequent meetings. Bina is associated with teshuvah. So Michael, your comment kind of made me want to close on this idea. Bina is associated with teshuvah. So as a reminder for those who don't know the word teshuvah, teshuvah is associated with repentance, but teshuvah also means return. Bina, so teshuvah is in fact a name for Bina. Okay, so allow that to sink in when you're reading your machzor next year at the high holidays, and you see the word teshuvah. He wants you to understand you're talking about Bina. So how is that? How does that make sense? Well, if we are down in the world of multiplicity, we're in the world of division or multiplicity or delineation, you know, the world where there's good and bad and there's you and there's me. And in that world gets itself out of balance. And how does the world return to harmony? By remembering that there is, underneath all of the multiplicity, there's just an energy of oneness. There's a divine oneness that is, in fact, holding everything together. It only appears to be you and me, right? But actually, it's all a product of God, just breathing the world in and out. The thing that's animating you is your soul. The thing that's animating me is my soul. Those are both part of God without any division. So underneath the world that we live in that appears to be so divided, and where there's, you know, loneliness and separation and heartache and rancor and war, underneath that, it's all within the one. And so teshuvah is the process of turning back from from a consciousness in which we're leaning into the multiplicity, right? So the world of sin is the world of one where I mistake this thing for being like the real truth of like me, my ego, my suffering. This is what's real, and everything else is sort of less important, and I'm going to double down on that and build my life around myself and my own needs. That's the world of sin. To do teshuvah is to reach beyond the world of creation, to reach up, so to speak, because it's not literally up, but to reach up into the supernal sphere, to return myself to that constant energy of oneness and unity and mercy that God is flowing into the world. And the way that I access that is Bina, because Bina is constantly flowing a new energy of life into the world from that supernal unity, from like the divine book plan, like God's plan for the universe, to kind of make this somewhat ridiculous. And from that, God, you know, flows goodness into the world in an unceasing way. That becomes available to me when I turn to Bina, and I'm looking for that unity and understanding that there is unity under everything. That is Bina. And in that sense, Bina really does mean understanding. I'm understanding that in this world of multiplicity, there is actually a single source of all things. And that makes me want to get out of my ego, get out of the world of separation, and to serve the world of unity. So that's in some sense getting back to Gan Eden, getting back to that world where humanity lived in total harmony with God. So I'm going to stop there. I'll take another round of questions or comments. So raise your hand. I want you to be candid here because this helps inform my own teaching. You've been a very quiet, compliant group, and sure, I love compliance. It makes my life so much easier. But give me a sense. Like, raise your hand if you have no idea what's been said over the last hour, and if you need more clarification. We're not going to take the time for it now. Raise your hand if this felt like a little too slow and you wanted to go deeper. Okay. Okay. And then, raise your hand if you felt like, no, this is about the right pace and I got something valuable out of the class. Okay. So Cheryl, looks like you'll have to drop the class. Just kidding. Mm-hmm. So, I'll try to step on the speedometer a little bit next time. But what we're going to do next time is we're going to go deeper into Binah. So there's no required reading for this class. There was initially, and then people found this so impenetrable that I said, you know what, don't worry about it. You don't have to read it. But if you want to read for this class, then this is an English translation. I would not say it's fantastic, but it's serviceable. It's called Gates of Light. The translator is Avi Weinstein. I think Rob said these are very expensive, but you can find them.
I don't know. I got it on Amazon a while back. I don't remember it being really expensive.
Okay.
I mean, no more than.
You can buy it used. You can get it less.
The other thing is, let me just see one thing. I have to remind myself. Hold on.
$45, but you could have it by Wednesday.
Oh yeah, it is on Safaria, but it's not. Most of it is not translated. Let me just see if the chapter on Binah is translated. Nope. Okay, so yeah, you'll have to look at that. And next time we'll delve further into Binah, and that's it. Thanks so much for joining in. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Take care.
I